The vote was not close. In the grand chamber of the interstellar conclave, a vast crystalline hall orbiting a dying red dwarf 300 light-years from Earth, 211 species cast their ballots on the fate of the Velhari people. The Velhari had made the mistake of refusing to surrender their homeworld's mineral reserves to the conclave's expansion initiative. They had spoken out. They had resisted. So the conclave voted to erase them. 210 species raised their hands, their tendrils, their bioluminescent fins, whatever limb carried the weight of consent, and voted yes. One species did not. Ambassador Darian Voss stood from his seat, a seat that had always seemed slightly too large for a single human, built for creatures wider and stranger than him, and he did not raise his hand. He raised his voice. This is not justice. His words carried through the translation matrix, rendered simultaneously in 211 tongues. This is not security. This is not policy. What you are calling a vote is the formal decoration of a massacre, and humanity will not decorate it. The chamber fell into a hush so deep that the hum of the station's life support systems became audible, a low, mechanical heartbeat beneath the silence. Chancellor Lyra Vera, seated in the Velhari observation gallery above, heard those words through her earpiece and felt something she had not felt in 14 months, the sensation of being seen. She was tall for a Velhari, with pale iridescent skin and eyes the color of deep water, and she had watched the proceedings from behind reinforced glass because the conclave had not granted her delegation a floor seat. They were defendants, not participants. A species on trial was not afforded the courtesy of participation. She watched the human stand alone beneath 211 alien gazes, and she pressed her three-fingered hand flat against the glass. Ambassador Voss continued. We were invited into this conclave because humanity demonstrated, and I quote the founding charter, a capacity for cooperation unprecedented among Type I civilizations. We joined because we believed this body stood for something. We joined because we thought civilized meant something. He let the word hang in the translated air. Apparently, it only means organized. The conclave's arbiter, a towering Grethkai whose ceremonial robes dragged across the floor like a slow tide, called for order. Ambassador Voss. Your objection is noted and overruled. The vote stands. The Velhari reclamation will proceed within 30 standard cycles. Then humanity's presence in this chamber ends today, Voss said, and he picked up his data tablet, tucked it under his arm, and walked toward the exit. No one tried to stop him. But before he left, he paused at the threshold, the great arched doorway carved with the conclave's motto in 100 scripts, and he said one final thing over his shoulder. My government will be accepting refugees. The announcement reached Earth 17 hours later. It hit the global feed at 3:42 Greenwich Mean Time, which meant it hit North America at dinner, East Asia at breakfast, and Europe in the smallest hours of the night. It didn't matter. Within minutes, every comment section, every message board, every kitchen table with a news screen was debating the same question. We're taking in 10,000 aliens? The answer, delivered by the Secretary General the following morning from the steps of the United Nations building in Geneva, was unambiguous. Yes. We are. She did not explain at length. She did not issue a cost-benefit analysis or a demographic impact projection. She said, a people are about to be destroyed because they were inconvenient. We know what that looks like. We've done it to each other. We are not doing it again, and we are not standing aside while someone else does. The crowd outside was enormous. And it was cheering. Chancellor Lyra Vera arrived at Earth's orbital reception station aboard a converted cargo vessel, one of 11 ships carrying the surviving Velhari population across 400 light-years of contested space. The conclave had not tried to intercept them. Destroying the Velhari on their homeworld was policy. Pursuing them into human territory was, apparently, a different calculation. She stepped off the transit shuttle and onto a platform where Darian Voss was waiting. He was shorter than she had expected. Broader. He had dark skin and close-cropped gray hair and the permanent slight squint of a man who had spent too many years reading documents in bad lighting. He held out his hand, and after a brief pause, Velhari greeting protocols involved the forehead, not the palm. She took it. "Chancellor Vera," he said. "Welcome to Earth. I'm sorry for the circumstances." Ambassador Voss. Her translator rendered her words into flat, clean English. "I watched you stand up in that chamber. I noticed. You knew it would not change the vote." "Of course." "Then why?" "Because the record needed to show that someone said no." He dropped her hand and gestured toward the station's viewport, where Earth hung below them, blue and white and unreasonably, almost offensively beautiful. "Come on. There's a lot of paperwork." "There's always a lot of paperwork." The next 6 months were difficult in ways that no diplomatic briefing had adequately prepared anyone for. 10,000 Velhari were not a number. They were people, elderly people who could not process cold weather, children who had nightmares about sounds that did not exist on Earth, engineers, and teachers and farmers and musicians who had lost everything they had ever built and were now being asked to build again in a world where the sky was the wrong color and the gravity was slightly too heavy and no one could pronounce their names correctly on the first try. Chancellor Vera established the Velhari Resettlement Coalition within the first week, operating out of a converted logistics facility in New Zealand that smelled, she told Voss, like something between wet grass and ozone, not unpleasant, only extremely strange. The coalition worked alongside human agencies, human volunteers, human bureaucracies. It was, by any measure, a logistical catastrophe. Translation matrices glitched. Dietary requirements went unmet for days at a time before anyone caught the error. There were cultural misunderstandings so profound they required emergency diplomatic consultations at 2 in the morning. And humans, ordinary humans, not ambassadors, not politicians, showed up anyway. A retired school teacher in Christchurch spent 3 weeks learning Velhari number notation so she could tutor the children without making them feel alien in their own classroom. A civil engineer in Osaka reverse-engineered Velhari architectural load-bearing principles so the temporary housing didn't feel like cages. A teenager in Lagos uploaded a 50-episode video series on human music, starting with the oldest recordings anyone could find, because she had heard that Velhari culture was built around sound and she thought they might want to know that humans were too. Lyra Vera watched all of this from her office, a real office, now, in a permanent building, and she recorded it in her official chronicle, which she had decided to keep from the first day of the resettlement and which she intended to last as long as Velhari memory could carry it. She wrote, "They are a strange species. Chaotic. Loud. Inconsistent. They argue with each other constantly about what they believe, and the argument never seems to end, and somehow this does not prevent them from acting. I have spent 200 years in interstellar politics and I have never encountered a civilization that is so simultaneously uncertain about its own values and so viscerally committed to them." She paused, and then wrote, "I think the uncertainty is the commitment. They keep asking whether they are doing the right thing because they actually care whether the answer is yes." 1 year after the vote in the Grand Chamber, Ambassador Darian Voss received a formal communication from the Interstellar Conclave. It requested that humanity reconsider its withdrawal and rejoin proceedings. Several member species had raised concerns about human absence. He read it twice. Then he set it aside and walked down the hall to Lyra Vera's office, where she was reviewing housing expansion proposals with a team of Velhari architects and 2 very caffeinated human city planners. She looked up. "The conclave wants us back," he said. "What will you tell them?" He leaned against the doorframe and considered the room. The blueprints spread across the table, the diagrams of buildings designed to fit 2 species worth of needs, the coffee cups and the translation earpieces, and the slightly too loud argument happening in the corner about whether a central courtyard counted as structural or aesthetic. "I'll tell them we're busy," he said. Lyra Vera looked at him for a long moment. Then something moved in her expression, not quite a smile, Because Velhari faces did not smile the way human faces did, but something in that direction, like light moving underwater. Yes, she said. We are. In the end, the conclave did not erase the Velhari. Because the Velhari were not on their homeworld when the reclamation fleet arrived. They were on Earth. Learning the names of its birds. Teaching their children constellations that no longer held a home star. Planting gardens in soil that was not quite right and watching things grow anyway. They were, against all odds and all calculation, alive. And the species that had voted to protect them asked for nothing in return except the one thing humans had always been most interested in. A good story about it, later.